and welcome to Peccadillo Sofa Club. I'm Daisy Jones, your host for the evening. I'm a writer, editor and author, but today I'll be playing the role of host. And today we're going to be speaking about Rebel Dykes, which is a documentary about a community of lesbians and queer people in 1980s London. And it includes loads of really cool archival footage and original animation. So today I'm going to be joined by the film's directors, Siân A. Williams and Harri Shanahan. Hey.
Hi.
Hello. And I'm also going to be joined by producer Siobhan Fahey. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Is it Fahey?
Yeah, Fahey, Siobhan Fahey.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I'm really excited to chat. I absolutely love the documentary so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Wow, thank you.
Where are you both?
And we're in Manchester.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where are you?
I'm up in Glasgow.
Oh, very nice. I'm in South London right now.
Is it freezing up there as well?
It's quite cold, but it's okay. I've actually got the heating on blast just for this chat, so it's okay. So I guess, should we watch the trailer?
Sounds good.
It was a great time and a terrible time to be young and queer.
Thatcher had just got in. Politically, there was always this attempt to silence.
We were very naughty.
Yay! It gets me quite revved up to watch that trailer. Does it still make you excited seeing that trailer?
Actually, yeah, it was fun to make it, and actually got my brother, who works in film and TV trailers generally, to like edit the music and put all those kind of sounds in it. And I think when I got it back, it was like, oh, now it sounds like a trailer because it has those kind of moments of on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really think about that stuff, like the rhythm of it and things. But yeah, I remember seeing the trailer a long time ago and being like, I have to watch this film. And should we speak about how the documentary came to be? Like, where was the initial seed? Because I feel like I've heard that it took quite a while to come into fruition. And it must have done with all the sort of old footage and stuff like that. Sort of at what point was it decided that this should be a documentary?
Mm-hmm. Well, it started off as an oral history project, really, me just noticing that a part of my life, my own history, had never been recorded and I never seemed to hear about it. And it was really cool, and we knew that at the time, and I never ever read anything about it. So I started off by sort of collecting oral history and photographs, really. Did about 3 days of recording interviews down at the South Bank in London. And I turned that into a presentation, which I sort of like an audio-visual talk thing, which I did at a few conferences and events, and it was really popular. But I wasn't a filmmaker and I hadn't really thought about that sort of thing at all. But I did want it to be recorded, and I knew that Siân made films, all sorts of things. And so I was asking Siân to just tape it for me, really, to stick it up on YouTube. And Siân had much bigger ambitions than, yes.
Yeah, it kind of snowballed from there, because, I mean, the Rebel Dykes kind of subculture is like something that I already felt passionate about. Like I was a big fan of like the music scene and like the photographers in particular. So as soon as Siobhan mentioned it, I was like, this has to be a feature. This is like too big a thing. And I got really excited, and I wanted to get my friend Harri, who we were in a band together, and we would just quite often get pissed and talk about fantasy films we wanted to make.
we always said, let's make a film, and then one day I was like, you doing anything? And I was like, nope. So I was like, well, you are now, basically.
And I think because particularly like I come from an artist moving image background, like around work, and my day job is has been like a film archivist, and Harri is an animator. So we really wanted our project to be using those kind of skills. So we just got really excited about it.
I mean, in fairness, I wasn't an animator then. I've been playing around with it, but I was mostly just making little music videos and things. I'd done, film school, and then was just working in care, and then I was unemployed. But yeah, I actually learned animation as a strategy for storytelling in Rebel Dykes.
Yeah.
So that was like quite a big learning curve. But yeah, it was Siobhan's presentation, Sian's idea, and then I got dragged into it, and I'm so glad that I was. Yeah.
Where did all that old archival footage come from? Because there's so much of it, even though a lot of it is also animation, and the animation does a great job at like bridging the gap. But where did all those videos come from? It's such a treasure chest.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just, if you notice that the animation is layered on top of the archive. I mean, we're talking about that we didn't have this experience before, but I think in a way that we didn't sort of know what you couldn't do. And when I was working with Siân and Harri all the way through, there was no limit to their imaginations about what's possible. I mean, I do love that. So I was very much in charge of the archive, partly because, of course, I do think when we talk about us just then, like we were like the perfect team, having Siân, who is the archive historian. But I did the work of the sort of dog work of collecting the archive because I had the contacts. It was my friends.
Yeah, you found loads of people, didn't you, through making a big group and tracing people and getting them to donate the photographs. And we had a huge load of stuff come from Karen Fish, who's in the film. That Siobhan had sort of found that out, and all the posters and things. But there wasn't much video, and actually there was only a couple of tapes, and it took us a long time, didn't it, Siobhan? You and I had a lot of battles trying to clear a couple of those tapes. But a lot of what you see is actually been sort of like recreated by Siân.
Yeah, and in fact, we're talking about 4 or 5 tapes at the most.
And when we're talking about tapes, we're talking about of a few minutes length, because these were videos that were recorded on cine camera. But I think that so what Siân's saying there is that so much of it's recreation. Siân was in charge of the recreation, the fiction, really. I mean, some of it is fiction because they're wearing masks, but an awful lot of the film wasn't filmed in the 80s.
No, it was either filmed on Siân. You had some old cameras, didn't you? And it went out and filmed with mates wearing jackets, and then some of it we ended up having to treat in post to make it match.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the clubbing scenes are, for instance, Islington Mill, a brilliant venue in Manchester. Yeah. And we always say this is that that London, that the 80s London doesn't exist. Yeah. When they were going to recreate it, they filmed it in Rochdale, and
But just to add that there is a lot of artist footage that is from the time.
That's true.
Anne Robinson is an amazing artist who filmed a lot of the Green and Common footage.
Yeah.
Also, without the photographic collection, like the film just would not be the same. And having built that community on Facebook, it meant that people could be identified, and it was like, we'd share more and more pictures would go up, and then it would be like, oh, do you know who this is? And it just became, the photography is kind of the backbone, I think.
Yeah, it's a mixture of artist photography, like professional, proper photographers, people like Della Grace and
Lola Flash,
Jessica Tanza,
and Lola Flash, and people like that who were taking these really beautiful art photos. But a lot of it was also just like candid snaps, and it was finding ways to use those kind of those snaps and make it sort of fit with the more professional photos. So it was quite a fun job in the editing,
And also
the archive the archive is massively bigger than what you see on screen, and that's now at Bishopsgate, particularly the stills.
The photos are amazing. The film also was nominated for quite a few awards as well, which is really cool, including I guess you won the Iris Prize for Best Feature in 2021, so congratulations for that. Should we take a look at the moment you won?
No. Yeah.
The best feature film goes to Rebel Dykes, directed by fine. You know who you are. You know who you are. You don't need the names. Harri, Shanahan, and Sean A. Williams.
Oh my God! Like, what the? We didn't know. I assumed that the people who had won would know. We didn't. Thank you so much. This is an incredible, amazing honour for 3 people that have really genuinely never made a film before. We made it for about 20p in our own bedrooms. So, first of all, it was Siobhan's idea and Siân made us do it. But yeah, we've got to thank every single person that we interviewed, every single Rebel Dyke that just gave us their stories. Sorry, my head's melting. I'm going to hand over.
It feels amazing because this is my old uni, and I never thought I'd get to make a film and to just. Oh, and it's Harry's hometown.
Someone take a picture from me, Dad.
Oh, and a shout out to any filmmakers who are neurodivergent or disabled.
Oh, yeah. We're totally autistic as well.
Fucking broke and have to do this around their day jobs, and just keep going anyway. Like, because we did it, you know. It's not the ideal way.
If there's a story that needs telling, tell it. Make it into a movie because it lasts, and lesbians go to the cinema. Nobody believed us. Lesbians go to the cinema.
Fund women filmmakers. Good night.
It's so nice.
It's so embarrassing. I haven't seen that since then.
Lesbians do go to the cinema.
Well, we've had lots of people tell us they don't over the years.
Yeah. I mean, how does it feel watching back that clip? Like, is it your excitement is palpable? It's really nice to see.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you could tell we were surprised, right?
I think the surprise was evident. Yeah, we were very surprised and very pleased. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I can't believe they don't tell the winner before they win. I thought they must at least give a little nudge.
I don't think it had occurred to us that we might win. I think, we hadn't even made a speech or anything or thought about it. But obviously we were, as you can see, we were dead chuffed.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing film. So obviously you should have won. And I think one of the things I love about this film is that so much of it is about like physical spaces and club culture, which is very dear to my heart. Should we look at a clip about that, I guess, from the film?
We had already been running a club called Ecstasy in Finland since 1985, doing the kind of things with arts, pornography and SM. And we always mix those 3 things together. There were lots of trans people there and lesbian mothers, and there were bisexuals and androgynous people, like how we called ourselves. It was kind of like a really open queer group, and it attracted people who were artist-minded and who were really free in their will.
She was an artist, but she wanted to also bring sex into art or art into sex.
Chain Reaction had had a real build-up from women all over the place. Some saying, oh no, you don't want to go there, don't do a lot of women. And then other women saying, oh, well, you've got to go, you've got to go.
I knew you had to wear a dress code, and I had a leather jacket and I had Dr. Martin boots, so I thought, oh, that'll do. So I went and I paid my £1 and I got in, and I was just so scared of meeting anybody, and I thought it was going to be, I didn't really have an understanding of what happened there.
We would arrive at about 9 o'clock. I think we opened about 10, and we would have our tool of choice, which was a roll of black bin liners, and then we would cover up all the windows with black bin liners. That was all the decorating we did, was just covering up the windows. There was a back room where that was almost like a culture of its own, actually, the pool room. Sometimes you'd wander in with your rubber dress trying to attract a butcher's attention.
Everybody was very busy, of course, coming there and looking very cool in their leathers and finding people to have sex with. But the cabaret was a bit like the highlight.
I was getting quite sucked in then. I was almost quite surprised when that clip ended. I just wanted to watch more. And Seja, is that how you pronounce her name? Saya. She's such a cool character. I really wanted to be Saya's mate.
She was at one point, I think she told me afterwards, or somebody told me, but unfortunately we didn't get to talk about it in the film, that she'd been like listed as one of Finland's most dangerous anarchists.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and they preemptively put her in jail for the night when the president of the US came to visit, Reagan came to visit Finland.
What an icon.
Yeah. So she's pretty cool.
So yeah, I love how prominent S&M is in the film. That was quite sort of a talking point, I guess, especially in the middle of the doc. Why do you think queer culture and S&M culture converged in that way back then? Why do you think those two things ended up being sort of, in certain scenes anyway, together?
Yeah, I think particularly because there was like this kind of like schism between like lesbian feminist kind of groups where they had kind of a different approach to sex versus like the more kind of like Lisa Power says in the film about being a lesbian through lust and not politics. So it kind of created two kind of spaces. So I guess SM club space became like a very important place where you could be queer and sexual and find community. So I guess it kind of, just through reflectioning between the two kind of groups, I guess.
Yeah, and I think once you're already outside the mainstream, aren't you? And I think there's partly that, and I think partly it must have been the influence of those German clubs like the Peltzer.
Yeah.
And Sale bringing that over as well.
And there was certain people. The scene in San Francisco was incredibly influential. In some ways, it felt, even though it was back then, in some ways the roots between different scenes and different cities felt much closer, I feel, than they did today. We'd be always going off to San Francisco or New York to do a bit of sex work or whatever, or Berlin. It was very fluid. And so there was a lot of toing and froing, particularly with San Fran and Berlin. So yeah, I think very influenced by what was happening in the rest of the world and influencing.
And Rebel Dykes had more in common kind of with gay male like leather culture, to be honest, than a lot of the other kind of lesbian culture. So, yeah, it's almost like a shared kind of style as well.
Yeah, and bizarrely in those days, it was because of the schism that Siân was talking about. You were either for or against. And so even if you fancied women, you'd be verging on being labelled S&M. I mean, you'd be labelled S&M if you wore a leather jacket.
Yeah.
So because it was like very much an us and them, with us or against us, and that line S&M. So some people who use the name S&M certainly did play around with whips and have a good time with that. But it was just, well, I'm not with them lot. I must be with them lot.
Yeah.
I think Lisa actually says it in the film, that she said, a lot of people who got involved in that scene weren't even into S&M sex particularly, but they said, they joined in because that was the side that was having the fun. And I think, it was a kind of, are you into the sex side of it, and I think there was a very much, that political lesbianism thing where you were kind of being a lesbian as a political stance. Yeah. And I think,
and that's a really interesting thing that almost can't imagine now. But feminist women would call themselves lesbians and comment on other lesbians and how they were having sex, saying things like, penetration was male and all of this. It was terrible, and they weren't even, They were just. It was just a political move.
I know.
It was very strange.
You think you have cancel culture these days, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, it sounds like it's interesting to hear those divides, especially in relation to S&M. I haven't, there is a bit of that, but I feel like it sounds like it was much more prominent back then than it is now, for sure. And why do you think it changed? And also, when do you think that changed? Like, do you think it was, I don't know, in the 90s?
I do think that Rebel Dykes, or the S&M Dykes of London and New York and San Francisco, had a huge change on it. There was the men's leather scene. I do think the women's leather scene also, created Madonna's sex book, and the photographers of the day, they were the underground and really influenced John Paul Gaultier and all the sort of fashion. So the fashion very quickly from the late 80s celebrated kink really for a while.
Do you think Madonna helped popularize it by sort of pinching that style? Like pinching or being influenced by, however you want to say it. I don't want to get sued by Madonna, but I think that kind of, and I think and it's sort of, then the whole sex positivity movement came out of America after that, didn't you? You know more about that than I do, really.
Well, I guess it became mainstream as a style and a fashion in the early 90s, but also like the politics, I guess, became more mainstream with third wave feminism and Riot Girl, and even just like the legacy just from the music, from the bands. I mean, you can follow that through Queercore into Riot Girl, into so it's the same groups, just like get more people are having more awareness of them. And I also think, I mean, when it comes to like the invasion of the BBC, these really pinnacle moments where suddenly there was a massive public spotlight on them, and I think that it's like almost like after that marker is kind of where they're more known.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite moments in the film. I hadn't actually seen the clip. I know the clip's not actually in the film, but you do like a brilliant reenactment. But afterwards I did actually look it up and I could watch it online, and it looks very similar to how you reenacted it. So that was a really good job. Shall we take a look at that clip now?
Sure, yeah.
The invasion of the 6 o'clock news at the BBC was another high-profile action that we did. I didn't actually go in there, but I was kind of involved in the thinking about it. Red and Stella in particular, who'd been on the abseiling, and then various other dykes who hadn't been on the abseiling but were really, really keen to do some more direct action around Clause 28, came together in a new sort of group of activists, and we started to plan. It was helped by the fact that one of the dykes had a friend who worked, I think, as a runner in the BBC, and passed us a floor plan so that they had an idea of where the studio actually was in this massive TV centre. Yeah, there's quite a lot of hair-raising bits of kind of being on completely the wrong floor. I seem to remember they had to sort of lock themselves in the toilet for quite a long time. They're a bit more organised this time. They had T-shirts with Stop the Claws on. I think they had to go and kind of strip off and get their T-shirts in place. But anyway, they kind of pulled it together, as we know, because we do have the film footage of that. And they got into this studio and padlocked themselves to the bottom of the desk, which is why they couldn't so easily get rid of them, and you could hear these muffled voices from under the desk.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Sue Lawley and Nicholas Witchell.
Good evening, the headlines at 6 o'clock. In the House of Lords, a vote is taking place now on a challenge to the poll tax. Tory rebels have said that the tax is unfair and unpopular. And I do apologise if you're hearing quite a lot of noise in the studio at the moment. I'm afraid that we have rather been invaded by some people that we hope to be removing shortly. In the meantime.
And Sue Lawley holding it together very well. I think we all have to agree she did a masterful job there. Whereas Nicholas Witchell, who then went on to be the royal correspondent, he got stuck in it off camera.
Stop Section 28! Stop Section 28!
Helping the security guards to squash them and get on top of them.
And direct action is important. With one thing done by half a dozen people, you can be on the 9 o'clock news and reach the whole country and make a point. And, sometimes it doesn't work, but when it really works, by God, it works. And it was horrific. And yet, looking back, it was the thing that brought us all together and founded what has since become one of the most successful lesbian and gay movements in the world.
That was fun.
You actually shot that in the room that we're in right now. My room.
Yeah, I got to give props to my lovely friend Indigo, who acted so well in that little clip. It's also important to say that the people who invaded the BBC weren't necessarily the same people that were going to Chain Reaction, and that, you know, Rebel Dykes is a large group of people that were all involved in some way in kind of bringing, you know, the culture to the forefront, just because I don't want to imply that every single person that you see on screen was necessarily in the club mud wrestling and spanking each other, because that wouldn't be true.
Do you remember this happening at the time? Like,
I do.
Dare you?
I was very young at the time, but my memory is possibly not of it happening live, but like it being like as a end of the year kind of clip show kind of thing, something like that. It's like, but I remember that was the first time that I'd ever heard the word lesbian, and it basically meant that lesbian was equated with like this ultimate superhero that was gonna like break in places and change things. So it just made it seem like a really exciting thing.
Yeah, I love the focus on like direct action throughout the film. Why did you feel like it was important to, I guess, like place that front and center towards the end of the doc? Like, because you speak quite a lot about direct action sort of towards the end. Why was that important to include?
Well, there was a thread coming through from Greenham Common, and it was important to talk about Greenham Common because that's kind of where a lot of people met who ended up being in the film, and also you know, it's a space where people came out, and it was kind of a place where, firstly, the kind of division between these kind of more punky lesbians and the more political lesbians first became kind of obvious as well. So there was a thread of direct action, but it was just showing people getting stuck in. But it just became so important to the movement, and you know, you can't talk about, you know, the 80s and early 90s without talking about the rights movement, and you can't talk about the rights movement without talking about direct action.
Yeah, I think just going back to it being like a pinnacle moment, I mean, this was about protesting Section 28, and I think maybe up until that point, like the straight world might not have like realized how important it was. So it's almost like after that point, you're getting more people, the message out further. I mean, sadly, it still went ahead and was passed.
Yeah, Section 28 stayed in state. I actually didn't know that it stayed. I knew that it was there when I was in school because we were both affected by it in school. But the fact that it went on for so long was appalling.
Yeah.
And I guess even the echoes of it sort of even existed after it no longer existed, you know.
Well, I think in everyone who went to school when that was happening or was a teacher and was personally affected, like I think it's left a kind of generation of late 30s people with a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
So it was important to talk about people who were actively fighting that. Also, it's really cool. It's really cool to go abseiling in the House of Lords, and it's really cool to be breaking onto the BBC News, and we have access to the people who are, you know, who've done that. You know, why on earth wouldn't we tell that story? That it's amazing. So you know,
it made me want to do some abseiling into buildings.
I mean, I'm not going to say that you should, but I think they've kind of made that a lot more illegal now. Like, I don't think it was very legal back then, but it's become a lot more draconian now. And I think, they're going to arrest you for going on protests and things. So be careful out there if you do go abseiling.
But I guess that, you know, direct action is still important today, even in the era of social media. I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think one of the reasons why activism was so strong in the film is because it reflects the filmmakers, because, you know, we're all natural activists, and the things that are happening today, you know, I think that big spectacles like abseiling, things like that, like Lisa Power says in the film, really catch media's attention. And you really see people learning and still doing that sort of stuff. You know, XR, actor are still doing big, clever actions that catch the eye.
Yeah, because it cuts through. We've got social media now, and you might say, we don't need to do direct action because we've got social media, but there's so much social media that sometimes you need real life action to cut through the noise. And I think that's something that the climate activists are doing really, really well. Yeah. Is that they are, you know, whether you agree with what they're doing or not, it's like, it definitely grabs attention. And I think nowadays everyone's got a 3-second attention span, so direct action might be even more necessary now than it was back then, because we're completely saturated with information now.
And you end up sort of existing in an echo chamber, thinking that everyone agrees with what you agree with.
That is very true as well.
And I guess with the BBC thing as well, it's like it was a way of getting into people's heterosexual parents' living room or something, sort of where that information would never necessarily get to them in such a way.
Yeah. And it got to you. It got into your living room when you were a little tot.
I mean, it's still true. You don't see dykes and those sort of powerful dykes on TV very much. You know, there is a certain sort of lesbian that's a bit acceptable now and that, but I still think the sort of wild edge has disappeared from
you don't see a lot of butch women, do you, on TV? Not now. You don't see them.
No, like only occasionally it's like a side character maybe, but it's still
played for laughs or something. But yeah, it's still underrepresented, I think.
Yeah, and I think now is time for an ad break. So I'll see you in very shortly.
Thank you.
Ich finde andere Mädchen manchmal so schön. Als ich vorhin geschwommen bin, da habe ich was im Wasser gesehen. Es sah wunderschön aus, ganz so vollgepumpt mit Licht und Wasser. Da war es nur eine einfache Plastiktüte. Es ist da und dann ist es einfach wieder weg. Glaub ich nicht. 3, 2, 1.
So where you been?
Friend's place.
Boyfriend? What the hell have you been up to, young lady?
The cop's here.
It's a murder investigation now.
Get back in the house right now! You're gonna be okay. I promise you. Claudia! I'll be right here. By your side.
Hi. Welcome back. So now let's go to another clip in the documentary which speaks about ACT UP, which was an international grassroots political group founded in response to the AIDS crisis.
There was always this attempt to silence. The AIDS activism was silence equals death was one of the slogans that we used because nobody recognised us as a community and having a voice at all.
ACT UP is the AIDS coalition to unleash power, and it's an AIDS activist group, which I got involved in after going to the '87 March on Washington and seeing the Names Project be unfolded and just standing there for hours, hearing name after name after name. In ACT UP, we wanted to talk about women and AIDS. One of the things that was happening on the women's scene, on the dyke scene, is that there was becoming a sort of faction that was saying, well, you know, we're lesbians, we don't get AIDS, who became very judgmental. And so we needed to talk about behavior, that the virus was, you know, passed by behavior and not by identity, you know. It was great because it really did get people talking about the nuts and bolts of what, you know, what we did. You know, lesbians use IV drugs. Lesbians are strippers and sex workers. And something that very few people talk about, but lesbians sometimes sleep with gay men. And, you know, with men, but also with gay men. The proximity. And in those days, you know, drugs, party, you know, things happen. But I think particularly with sex workers, it was an issue because there was from one faction, there was this whole sort of attitude that, you know, if you slept with men in any way, shape or form, you were not a lesbian.
What do you think we're doing?
Very interesting. Yeah, that was a very interesting, illuminating part of the documentary to me, because you so rarely hear about lesbians and women's like part in aid activism. It's not something you hear about very often. Why was it important for you to include that in the film?
I think given the experience that Siobhan lived through in the 80s, especially because Siobhan nursed AIDS patients and things, we couldn't talk about, you know, 80s without talking about AIDS. And also, yeah, to make that point really that, yeah, women did, you know, get AIDS and they did die from it. But also it was at that point where the you know, lesbian community and the gay men's community started to come together much more. And so that was another reason to talk about it, was that it was really important in uniting you know, the queer community, because we're much more mixed these days. You don't really have that separatism anymore. You know, you go to a queer night, you meet people of, you know, many genders and many flavors and many sexualities, and personally I think that's really positive. But it was the beginnings of that queer culture there, so we wanted to unearth that, and it was really that time. I think it's also important to just pay homage to, like, you know, the people who died, the people who suffered, the people who protested, and the people who worked really hard to save each other's lives.
Yeah, Siobhan, do you remember the community kind of coming together during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I always say I don't know a lesbian who didn't work in some voluntary occupation. I worked at Landmark, and in fact I went off and did nursing, really inspired by the AIDS crisis. And it luckily, you know, a lot of the sex that lesbians were having wasn't passing on the virus, but that almost didn't matter because it was our friends who were dying, our mates. Like, I mean, we will never, thank God, you know, that sadness and that loss that went through a whole generation of young queer men. You know, it's a scar. It's a scar.
We wanted to make a film ultimately that was going to kind of inspire people and uplift people, and we had this conversation about also, do we talk about heroin? Because heroin use was a huge scourge in that community. You know, Siobhan and I talked about it a lot, but in the end we didn't put it into the film. But I think, you know, Lulu makes a passing mention. Yeah, people were using IV drugs, and that was passing the virus as well, and people just didn't know. We spoke to Paloma Desai, who did loads of AIDS activism later on in the 90s, which she didn't really fall into the kind of like time limit of, we had so much stuff. There's a whole other film to be made, I think, about you know, lesbians and the AIDS movement.
Yeah, it's probably quite hard to fit everything in. I don't know who said it in the film, but I think it was an important distinction to make, that the AIDS crisis, there was a lot of education around, not enough education around behaviour as opposed to identity, and how those things are extremely separate things, and it's nothing to do with identity. Yeah,
because there was this idea that there was this virus going around, you could get it if you were gay, and Lisa told us in you know, an interview that wasn't even in the film, that women were ringing up, well, I'm gay. Am I going to just catch it? And I think people must have been terrified. I mean, you remember how scared well, Siobhan, you will remember, but I'm just thinking how scared we all were when COVID hit. It would have been like that, you know, terrifying. Anyway, sorry.
Show us some dildos. Cheer us all up.
Well, one thing I heard is that someone had a dildo fight, and you didn't show that in the film.
There's a thing about slander and libel and traceability, and we can't afford lawyers of that ilk. So yeah, we just decided not to. But yes.
Are you allowed to mention it, or is that also libelous?
I really can't mention who was involved, but yes.
There's so much we had to cut. You wouldn't believe. It's another film that will never be seen.
Oh my goodness! I wish I could say, but people will have to just buy us a drink when they meet us in person.
Yeah, I'll have to ask you in person.
Yeah.
So
what was there quite a lot you had to cut then?
Yeah, but for many reasons. Not cut. That's really the wrong way of thinking it. But it's a strong. The word dyke is still a strong word. I mean, it's why I love it so much when it was up there in the cinemas. It's a strong word, and so there were many reasons why people didn't want to be in the film. Perhaps they had children or jobs or different careers. Some people had changed gender. I mean, it was fascinating doing the rabbit holing of finding people so that they could sign off the license so that we could use it.
Yeah, so there was people that we had to not include for various reasons, even people that we interviewed, and then there was but there was also stories that we couldn't include for legal reasons, and there was also things that we decided not to include because we were aware that although we knew it was going to be an 18, that there was going to be young people watching it, and we needed to there was some stuff around self-harm and suicide, for example, that we decided could be potentially triggering, some stuff around sexual assault that we just decided not to include. So for sensitivity reasons, for identity reasons, loads of things.
Yeah, it was just to add in that also we had a kind of high ethical standard of wanting to only feature people who completely signed off or agreed to be in the film. So whereas for the chain reaction footage, that was a private sex club. So you have, quite, you would assume that you would have privacy in there. So we had to make a decision of how we were going to show those pans that go through. We're very much against the idea of censorship. So I know you had to pixelate to show this on YouTube today, but there's no pixelation in the film. We tried to use video glitch kind of techniques and little overexposures and things like that to kind of reference the materiality of the archive, to cover the people that we couldn't sign off. But beyond just the chain reaction footage, there was it's not cutting out, but it's trying to represent people who are happy to
and sort of sensitively and discreetly hide everybody else. It took a while, didn't it? We had tried a lot of different ways of doing it before we figured it out, but
I didn't even think about that sort of stuff and how difficult that.
Yeah, we didn't either, and then we suddenly realised a lot of
Making documentaries set in a sex club is not the easiest thing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, don't do it, guys.
Yeah, I can imagine that's difficult.
But don't you think it's important? I would always fight that's really important that we're acknowledged as a culture that has underground sex clubs, and that we come from. That it is important if we're going to tell the tales of queer that we tell those tales too.
Yeah, we can't just tell the tales of the good, squeaky clean, sanitized queers. We have to tell the story of the bad guys and the bad girls and the bad people in between.
I think that's why we relate to them and their legacy anyway. To be
bad to the bone, this one. Don't get me started on support.
But yeah, no, for me personally, it was really important. Again, going back to the chain reaction tape, that is a document that proves that trans people were a part of that scene. There's a lot of people going back and just trying to change history and make out that it wasn't, like that.
Oh, didn't we only invent being transgender about 2 years ago? Apparently, no, it's been going on.
Speaking of the future, should we watch our final clip of the night?
Sorry, we're rabbiting.
Okay.
At least I hope that nowadays for young people, it's much easier to be what they are. And I think it's taken this 30 years to develop that people can start feeling more comfortable in a way they feel inside.
I'm about to start a new club which is about all women welcome. It means queer folks, it means non-binary. You know, when I hear my nieces and nephews talk about their experiences with gay and lesbian young kids, that's when I kind of go, we've moved on.
The trouble is that we've gone so far into the mainstream and we're so respectable now that we're losing all our sharp edges and we're losing our ability to be the rebels.
I like that how the film ends. Yeah, it was wild because, like, looking back at the moral panic that was in the 80s, that was being directed towards lesbians and gay people, I feel like a lot of that moral panic is now being replicated into how the media sort of speaks about trans people in a very similar way. And it's like
not just trans, the whole queer, and it's moving very quickly into LGBT. Drag is getting such a hard time at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. It's really funny. We did those recordings in 2017. I think it's gone backwards since we did those recordings, you know, of the interviews. Just an interest. I just thought that when I was watching them.
Yeah, there seems to have been a bit of a resurgence of some of those sort of second wave ideas within feminism, and then in the mainstream, there's like you said, there's a bit of a moral panic. Yeah, won't somebody think of the children and all that? I think a lot of it comes from misunderstanding, and I think it's based in ignorance, and then the flames are fanned by the way that anyone can get online, get on Twitter, and you know, potentially reach millions of people. So it's not any idiot with an opinion now has got like a mass. They're not just writing it in like mean little newspapers like they were back in the 80s. It's everywhere now.
Yeah, and I guess that misinformation is spreading because other people are benefiting from it, like the Tory party
and the right wing, the fascist.
For instance, the example with like people just misunderstanding what a GRC certificate is used for. Like, you can explain it in a sentence, and as soon as you tell, you know, a member of your family that, they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize." Like, and it's like, yeah, it's not what you think. Like, so people, you know, that could be corrected and just, you know, explained.
But there is a trans panic, and I think sometimes it's some of the same. Interestingly, there are some of the same people, or at least some of the same groups that had a problem with the Rebel Dykes are some of the same people or groups that are now having a problem with transgender rights, you know, advancement. And I find that very interesting. So there are some people who just want to tell other people how to dress, how to live their life, what spaces they can be in, and how they can have sex. There are some people who are genuinely scared, who genuinely don't understand. And, you know, I think we do need to, like, discuss it more openly as a community without keep blocking and cancelling each other. I think it is important that we have a dialogue, but it's got to be respectful. And I think a lot of people on the trans side are feeling just so threatened and, you know, devastated by that they're not in the space to do it. But someone's going to have a conversation. We need to.
I think especially.
Sorry, I got upset. Carry on.
I think a good thing about Rebel Dykes is it's intergenerational, and I think we have to. You know, people of my generation sometimes feel left behind, I think, and not, you know, and left out and assumed not to understand and to not be respected for the difficult times we had back then, my dear. You know what I mean? And I think that the only way we can get through it, and to be kind to each other. You know, Harri and Siân will tell you I make mistakes with pronouns, and I don't mean to. But sometimes, you know, we have to be kind and learn with each other. And you know, there's a new generation now since you know, with new ideas, and we have to keep the communications together, because at the end of the day, we are all on the same side, and not many of us. We have to help each other.
It's been so like massively inspiring to me to meet and talk to the Rebel Dykes and hear their stories. And I think it's really important that we, like Siobhan said, that we do talk between the generations and things. Otherwise, I do think that we end up again with a schism, another schism. And it's like, no, we need each other. There's not enough of us.
It's like we only broke through because of that unity towards the end of the 80s anyway. So like, this is now the biggest threat, I think, is breaking the letters apart. And we must do everything to stop that.
Yeah, there are people who are like, we don't want LGBTQ, we want to go back to having lesbian separatism, we want to have these separate gay men, no guys, we're weaker separately. So we're very passionate about it.
Yeah, really, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, and there's lots of overlap between those communities as well. Some people belong to more than one, so.
Cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
and to others.
Do you think there's less generational communication because there's not so much, I don't know, physical spaces that people go to, or why do you think that doesn't?
I agree. That's it, Daisy. That's it, Daisy. Physical spaces that aren't necessarily bars, because there's probably the ones who are most comfortable in the bars are the boomers, but Generation Zs and all the other new generations have different ways, and we do need to meet in spaces, in actual real spaces.
Yeah.
And we have to make that, one of the things I do is put on events at the moment, I do film clubs up in Glasgow, but, we have to think of ways to create our own, communities again.
And there are people doing that from the grassroots now. There is one club started up in Manchester that was inspired partly by that Rebel Dykes story. So that's really exciting that people are starting to organise in that kind of way. But yeah, we need to meet each other in person, not just fight with each other on Twitter. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Even I'll go to a club and I'm 30 and I'll be the oldest person there by a mile. So
well, there's another club for you though. You live in London, there must be one for 30-year-olds.
I hope so. I hope there's somewhere. Now, I guess this is a question for you all, but what are you all doing now, like post Rebel Dykes? Are you working on other films? Like, what are you all working on?
Siobhan, go on.
Well, I mean, in some ways we're still working on Rebel Dykes because it never finishes, and so yeah, we've just got a distributor for America and the rest of the world. So a shout out to Lovely Women Make Movies. We're dead happy to be with them. So that's still going. So we're about to hit America, which will be fun. But yeah, I'm trying to make a fiction film next. I want to carry on making films, so doing lots of pitching to try and get a fiction, a drama, a queer horror film made. And Siân and Harri I'm making a short about Dan Glass talking about activism, who's a London activist. Siân and Harri are making a short film, I think.
Yeah, we're making one about somebody who was actually involved in the Rebel Dykes scene that we just missed. We never met her. She was a bit older than the rest of the Rebel Dykes. So she's in her 70s now. But we met her at the Rebel Dykes exhibition, and we're just sort of like blown away with her friendliness and her loveliness and her story. She rescues foxes in Brixton. She still lives in Brixton. She's an amazing painter, and she sings flamenco.
Wow. Who is this person?
She's called Lucy Martin. She's just one of the larger than life characters I've ever met, and she's absolutely lovely.
Just an absolutely amazing story and some stunning paintings. I think she's never really had the credit that she deserves or that spotlight on her. So we're trying to come up with another documentary.
That's exciting.
It's going to be about mental health and queerness and aging in the queer community and how important queer community is and art is, for your well-being, and also be nice to foxes, I think.
Yeah.
Nice. Good to have some foxes in there. And I think we might have some time to take some audience questions or questions from the audience.
Did anyone ask any questions?
Yes, they did. This one's from Ralph.
Ralph.
In the 80s and 90s, there was a genuine community of lesbians and gay men. We seem to have lost this. What do you think?
Well, just from personal experience in Manchester, it's incredibly mixed queer culture here. So it feels the same for me. And that's why I kind of relate to the, I would have been a rebel dyke back in the day in the exact same way. So I'm not sure about in other places, but in Manchester, it's certainly the umbrella queer is incredibly inclusive and mixed faces. In fact, there's only one lesbian bar in Manchester, and it's very mainstream. It's called Vanilla.
I mean,
so yeah.
I think that's one of the only ones left in the UK. So
it's really important. Obviously.
Yeah, it is important. It's important for that space to exist. We need more space. We need more space. We need more face-to-face meetings, and I think that will definitely help to improve things. But I don't know where the person who asked the question is from.
Yeah, I guess it maybe depends on where you are. It's quite mixed in London as well, I would say.
Yeah, it depends on what scene you're in, I guess. I mean, I barely leave the house, but if I do, my friends are very mixed.
So this one's from Kate. And Kate says, as mentioned, lesbians played a huge role in the AIDS movement. However, in high-profile shows such as It's a Sin, this was barely touched on. Do you feel there's been an erasure of lesbian activism?
Well, I'd like to speak for this one, if that's okay, because I have quite strong feelings about it. I think that we needed the space for gay men to tell their story, and I completely agree. I'd love to, and if you would really like that conversation, I have a lot of stories that I'm collecting, and I can imagine a documentary I'd make about that. So yes, I would really, really be interested in I think there's some really important lesbian activism and AIDS stories, but it took Russell T Davies nearly a decade to make that, if not more. And he needed to make that, and I don't mind it being about somebody else for once. We don't have to be included in every story. But yes, I'd love to make another film inspired by It's a Sin.
I do think it is harder, though, to sell lesbian stories than it is to sell gay men's stories. Now, why that is, I'm not sure, except that there's probably more men working in broadcasting than there is women. So I do think it's important that we do fight to get those stories told. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think you can't, when you go into pitching for things, they'll say, this is about too many things, narrow it down, narrow it down, narrow it down. So you have to be able to tell one story, you tell the story of the men.
Or the opposite, like, how is this universal? Because this is too niche, so we're not interested.
Yeah.
We did told lesbian stories are niche, and I think...
Well, women's stories are niche, I get that quite a lot.
But 52% of the bloody population. Sorry.
I go to the cinema more. But
I'm going to wind my neck in.
Just think about the Oscars, eh? That was terrible.
Say again, Siobhan.
At the Oscars, there was no female directors.
Yeah, I actually didn't watch the Oscars, but
the nomination came out last night.
Yeah. I guess that kind of leads on to our next question from Nora, which is, what are each of your favourite lesbian films and why? And did any of these films influence your vision of Rebel Dykes?
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Watermelon Woman. Just absolutely love it. I think because I'm an archivist as well as a filmmaker, and I'm into recreation and looking at gaps in archive, so it kind of ticks every box for me, that film. And actually at the Iris Pies, we got to meet Gerald Dunier as well, so that was amazing.
Yeah.
When did Watermelon Woman get released? It's quite an old film, isn't it?
Yeah, 92, I think.
92 or 93?
I think about 92.
Yeah. Your turn.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, probably, the one that came to mind isn't even a lesbian one, but it's because we were talking, and it's controversial, and it's only because we were talking about the gay men's leather scene, but I do like Cruising. That's a good film.
I haven't seen that.
No, it's difficult to find. 1982, Leatherman's Bar Live. It's controversial.
I'll have to look it up. I feel like I need to watch that.
So I didn't answer your question. I don't know what my favourite lesbian film is. I'd have to think about it.
I mean, it's hard. There's
not that many of them. A lot of them are what I call sappho films. You know, those women with long skirts and
from like the 18th century or like
like the SNL skit. of like
Yeah.
every period drama.
But I saw the film that they were taking off recently, and now this is not my favourite film, but about that what's she called? Who collected all the famous fossils.
Oh yeah, the one with Kate Winslet in it. Is that right?
No, it wasn't Kate Winslet in that one. Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was it's just this thing where everybody has to die. Someone has to die at the end or get dragged off to a sanatorium. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I did enjoy. It was a TV series. I did enjoy Tipping the Velvet. I thought that was.
Yeah, that's good.
I like the books. I really like. I just enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed the kind of visual opulence of it, and it was
I
pretty.
watched. Have you seen? Is it Saint Bernadetta or something?
Oh my god! Gosh, yeah, we went to see that at the cinema.
Big queer outing to see that.
Did you enjoy it?
I thought it was ridiculous, but I did enjoy it because it was so ridiculous. Like I was just like, "What the hell is this?"
I wasn't sure how to take it. I was absolutely hooting with laughter. Though.
It was so funny.
When she makes the, can I say dildo on YouTube? When she makes the dildo out of the Virgin Mary and all, I just thought, it's every Catholic cliche in the book, and I was brought up in that kind of culture, and I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
It's not as good as Showgirls, though, is it? But,
No. Which now I know that they're by the same person makes so much sense. But I actually quite liked it just for how campy it was.
It was very campy. We did have a good time watching that, didn't we?
This one's from Layla. How can you be rebellious in 2023? It's a good question.
Like this. No, I
That's hard from YouTube.
I suggest if you can't play any musical instruments, you should really start a band and then play as loudly as you can. That's what we did. Although actually, William's quite good on drums. I think you just have to keep telling your story as loudly and proudly as you can. And I think sometimes just being yourself is like, I know it sounds a bit weak, but being yourself sometimes in this world is an act of rebellion. Being like just. Oh. No, but I know, but guess to navigate through the world as a kind of like queer autistic little being is tough, and so I'm just like I'm resisting the forces of badness by simply being present in the world.
By not
stay alive. That's a big one.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Yeah, that's I agree. And I think we've probably got time for one more. So this one's from Jenny. If you could be part of any of the experience featured in the doc, which would it be?
I mean, I'd quite like to mud wrestle Debbie Smith.
I would like to be in a band with Debbie Smith.
That's probably more doable.
And Elliot, who was the composer and was an amazing, she's in Sister George and the Brendas, and did the soundtrack to the film.
Yeah, she's so cool.
Super group with Elliot and
Debbie.
Yeah.
And me. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Siobhan, you were in a lot of it.
I was in the film.
Is there anything you feel like you missed out on?
No.
You'd had enough of the 90s, haven't you? I would have quite liked to have done loads of acid and gone to that protest, which was fun. And I would have liked to have squatted without when it was still
Oh, can you imagine it? As I often say, can you imagine if you don't have to pay rent? Can you imagine your lives if you didn't have to pay rent or bills? Can you imagine how much creativity? It's almost like being given a universal income, isn't it?
I pay rent to live in something that is basically in a squat condition. It's
and loads of people do now. Loads of people. The squats weren't bad. They were good quality accommodation. You just didn't have to pay for it.
I've got to pay $800 a month for the same thing. Cool. I think that's everything. I think that's the show wrapped up. But thank you so much for chatting to me. That was loads of fun, and I think I want to watch the film again, even though I've seen it 3 times now.
Thanks everyone for watching as well.
Thank you for having us.
And thanks to the BFI for their continued support for the 2nd season of Peccadillo Sofa Club. Next week, we'll be highlighting 3 UK producers, Savannah James Bailey, Lauren Dunn, and Sorika Bacon, who came together to form the company Teen Club. One of their joint projects was Life in Love, made for ITVX, and we'll leave you with the trailer for that project. And next week's host will be Somaya. Thanks and good night.
By the day, my feelings are just getting stronger and stronger. I'm getting to a point where I really want to tell him.
What is your darkest childhood secret?
Say it. What do you want to talk about? Your heart's beating fast.
You looked really good last night. Thank you.
I promised that I might possibly maybe go. You just have to be there.
So what's happening with you two then? Good question.
Is it okay if we just kiss? Sounds good.
I'm excited and I'm ready to shake my ass.
Do you think he's gonna say it back?
This is the first time that I was really told that that's okay. And then you were like, I cried.
You're so crazy. You can do it.